Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
So I'd like to start today's conversation with a question. Why might a person want to hide their identity? Right? What are reasons that we can think of that a person may want to not make it known who they truly are? What do you think? Please. They could be a spy. Or what? Beautiful. Two different reasons. One, they could be a spy, right? And I'll expand that into giving up their identity may either cause them risk or may not allow them to perform a task that they've been set to do. That's a broader explanation of a spy, right? Or they may be ashamed, right? Maybe they're ashamed of something that they've done, or something they haven't done, and so they want to keep that. Good. What else? They could be in trouble and evading capture. Excellent. Mike? For safety, right? Maybe there's a reason that they don't want to share that because it will hurt them or hurt somebody else. Good. So this brings us then to the question in our Torah portion. If you open up to chapter 42 of Genesis, you can find it on page 258 and 259. Why does Joseph hide his identity? Right? Because that's what we're going to be reading today. The beginning of the chapter, when Jacob saw that there was food rations in Egypt, he sent all of his other children to go and figure out what's going on, except for Benjamin. And then you get to verse 6 at the bottom. Now Joseph was the vizier of the land, and it was he who dispensed all the rations. And Joseph's brother came and bowed low to him with their faces to the ground. When Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he acted as a stranger towards them and spoke harshly to them. He said, "Where do you come from?" Etc., etc., etc. And the story is going to continue. So why did Joseph hide himself?
It's kind of like the same as a spy, he had an agenda that he didn't want revealed.
So Marge is saying that Joseph had an agenda that he didn't want revealed. What was his agenda?
They had abused him tremendously, and obviously this is kind of a guess. He probably wanted to find out where they were now, who they were, how he was going to respond to them, and he needed some time to figure that out.
Excellent. So there's a number of different possibilities as to why Joseph did this, right? Marge said they abused him, when he was younger. They sold him into slavery. They almost killed him, right? So one possibility, by the way, is revenge, right? He wants to give them a hard time because they gave him a hard time. But I think the more well-known and the more established is that he wanted to test them, right? He wanted to see, where are they? Are they the same people that did this to me before, or are they different people? Yeah.
And also maybe he wanted to take time to assess where he was.
I like that, right? Maybe he wanted to take some time to assess where he was at, right? Maybe he wanted to have those moments of a couple of deep breaths before he responded, because one would imagine that his emotional knee-jerk response is going to be of anger, is going to be punishment. Here he has all the power. Good. Anybody else have any guesses as to why? Go ahead.
I think in a way he was even protecting them, because he said several times, is your father still alive? And this was like a really high stakes, this was like super high stakes. There was famine in the land, people were like dying of starvation, and he first wants to know he's asking a few questions also to strategize what he's going to do.
To give himself some time, maybe even.
And he literally does take the time.
Yeah.
There's that one scene where they're all there and he like kind of walks away and he cries and he's got all this makeup on and
Right.
everything, and then he's got to like put his face back on again. I mean, any women in the crowd know that story through her mascara.
Yes.
And so there was like there was a lot. There was just so much going on here. Like it's not this or this. I think it's yes and. He was doing everything I think that everybody here sort of mentioned.
Yeah, so just,
For the whole family.
yeah, just for the people who are home who couldn't hear, what Diana was saying was that all of these things, like it's not one or the other, it's actually a combination of all of these things. And this sort of gave him the time and the space to do that. The rabbis struggle with this a little bit, and they try to determine what his true motivation is. And Abravanel actually asks the question, why did Joseph denounce his brothers? Surely it was criminal of him to take vengeance and bear a grudge like a viper. Though they had meant evil, God had turned it to good, right? Joseph knew that this was all good. Joseph knew that this all worked out the way it was supposed to. So Abravanel is saying, well, why? So why then did he treat them harshly, right? Why did he turn against them? And different rabbis come up with different responses. One of them actually, hold on as soon as I can get this to work, Rambam in his explanation actually said, he was not only strategizing, but he knew he had a much bigger picture. He knew that his dreams had not yet come to fruition because Jacob and Benjamin weren't there. And so, yes, the fact that his 10 brothers were bowing down in front of him were part of the dream, but it wasn't the whole dream. Because without Benjamin and Jacob, that dream wouldn't be fulfilled, nor would the other dream of the sun, the moon, the stars, right, all of that be fulfilled. And so he had to figure out a way, according to Rambam, to get Jacob and his brother there. And this was how he did it. So this wasn't for Rambam about vengeance. It wasn't even an emotional response, which I struggle with, because I think this is an emotional response. We see his emotion there. But for Rambam, it was calculated, right? This was a strategy that he used to make the dreams that he had ultimately come to its full fruition, to fulfill that prophecy.
But couldn't both things still be true? Rambam's interpretation, and also that he was a human being who was struggling mightily with what had happened to him.
Yes. Yeah, I think both things absolutely can be true. Rambam just focused on one aspect of it. I'm not saying that Rambam would dismiss the others. He just chose to focus on this aspect where some of the other rabbis really chose to focus on the more emotional side of things. What's interesting about this is, we look at this story as if it's relatively unique, as if it's a paradigm or an archetype or an example of a very specific occurrence. One of the things that Robert Alter notices, and Rabbi Sachs picks up on this as well, is that this story it actually takes place a number of different times in our tradition. Robert Alter calls it a type scene, right? A type scene, where it's a vignette, it's an image that we see a bunch of different times. A great example would be an encounter that takes place by a well. Well, we see that a bunch of times in the Torah, a bunch of different ways. So Robert Alter calls this a type scene. So what is this a type scene of? Because we're going to say, wait a second, we don't see any other time where a ruler, is doing all of this or testing. So what is the type scene of? He argues this is a type scene of someone hiding their identity or wearing a mask. And I'm using mask in a figurative perspective, not a literal perspective, right? And he says this is actually one of 4 different type scenes of this moment. So what are the other ones? What are the other 3? Anybody want to take a guess?
Well, do you mean like when Abraham told Sarah to not say to say she was his sister, not his wife? Like that was where a little bit hiding her identity.
Interesting. Yes, it's not one of them that Robert Alter highlights for this, but I think there is a connection there. It's not quite the same because it's somebody else telling somebody to do it as opposed to a person making a choice to do it. So it's a little bit different, but it's got that connection.
But Abraham is choosing to show himself as her brother and not
Right. I think that's, yeah, it's interesting. I think we have to go back and look at that story. I don't think Alter did the research or saw that one as the same, and I'm not sure why. But it's not one of the 4 that were listed.
You mean the 4 where someone hides their identity?
Mm-hmm.
Sort of like in Gan Eden, where he's like, where everybody's kind of hiding, like, I don't know, it wasn't me who did it. They're all.
Interesting, right? In the Garden of Eden, everybody's saying, well, it wasn't me, it was that person. Okay.
They're sort of hiding from what they did.
Okay. Yes. Good. That's actually scene number 3 in Robert Alter's list, Judah and Tamar, right? Where Tamar hides her identity so that she can fulfill the ultimate vision of God and the ultimate prophecy and get herself out of being an agunah, an anchored woman, right? Because Judah wasn't doing what he was supposed to do. Excellent.
Rachel and Leah, maybe?
Good. Excellent. Rachel and Leah on the wedding day, right? So hidden away, and Jacob doesn't know until afterwards. Good, so that's 2.
Maybe Yaakov and Esau, I'm not sure, but somebody still told him to do it, to put the hair on his arms.
Excellent. Yaakov and Esav is number 3, right? Or it's actually number 1 in his book. So the 4 type scenes that Alter recognizes for this wearing a mask and hiding an identity is Jacob and Esav and Isaac, right? Where Isaac hides his identity and says, I am Esav, right? I'm sorry, it's where Jacob says that, I am Esav. Then Leah and Rachel and Jacob, then Judah and Tamar, and then our scene now. Those are the type scenes. 4 scenes, 4 disguises, and 4 different failures to sort of see behind the mask. So what do they have in common? Right? What do they have in common? By understanding that, we may learn more about our scene. Yeah.
Well, the people who orchestrated them thought they were doing the right thing to get something that was deserved.
So they all felt that they were doing this for a reason, to get something that they deserved or to get something that was sort of the right way of doing it. Good. Anything else? Go ahead.
Ultimately, it was about survival of the Jewish people, and that we're still here today. So if you go through the Tamar Judah lineage, I mean, we are Yehudim, like this is us,
Right.
basically. And then the whole idea that King David came from them, and then Mashiach comes, and all that. So every single one of them leads to some type of survival. This was like a physical survival where there was starvation in the land, and then possibly with Rachel and Leah, because Leah was the one that was able to make all these babies
Right.
too. So
Right.
she was the fertile one.
So you're arguing it's about our survival, right? And to some degree, with Joseph and the brothers, if they didn't have the food, if they didn't ultimately go through this, they would have died, and most of our progenitors of the people of Israel wouldn't be there. So it could be about survival. Anybody else? Yeah.
Well, there's greater complexity when there's more people. You know, as things got bigger, then there were more issues. And so people had to be, people are complicated. And there are more people, and so there's more complicated.
Yeah, so people, I love that. Let's just stop with that. People are complicated. I think that could be the end right there, right? Yes, people are complicated, and the more complicated we get and the more people that are involved, the more complicated these issues become, okay? It's interesting, Rabbi Sachs picks up on, I think, a little bit more of an esoteric piece to all of this, and he argues that they are not recognized, they hide themselves so that they can be recognized. There was something that was blocking their ability to truly be recognized for who they were. And by hiding themselves, it actually caused them to be recognized, right? By hiding her own face and ultimately sleeping with Judah, not in the way that it should have been done, because Judah wasn't doing that, right? But by doing that, she ultimately was recognized for who she was, and she was right. Right? Yitzchak favored Esav. He favored Esav. But our tradition, our text, God favored Jacob. And it was because of this, right or wrong, it was because of this that he ultimately was recognized for who he was. You could make the same argument with Joseph here, right? It's because of this back and forth that allowed for Joseph to not only be recognized as the vizier of Egypt, but as their brother once again, in a way that worked. But what's interesting to me is the way Rabbi Sachs ends his little excursus on this, is he asks the question, do these disguises actually work? And he says, interestingly enough, in the short term, yes, but in the long term, no. Right? He says, Jacob suffers greatly for having taken Esau's blessing. He doesn't actually, in the short term, he was recognized and he got what he wanted, but all of the story that comes later is a direct result of that lie that he told. Leah, she was able to marry Jacob, but she never won his love. Right? Even though she was married to him. Tamar has a child, but then it says afterwards that Judah was never intimate with her anymore. So yes, she got what she wanted, but it didn't make things better. And one could argue that when it comes to this story, right, they recognize now that he is their brother. They love him, but now they fear him. So none of them it doesn't actually work. And I think that is one of the most powerful lessons in all of this, because we struggle with a lot of these stories, right? We naturally struggle with them. When we talk about the fact that Jacob lies and does this, we say, how can we look at this person and say, here's an example of who we should be. This is our patriarch. And we talk about the fact that our patriarchs are human beings and they're flawed and they make mistakes, and that the book of Genesis is filled with all sorts of things that we should learn from what not to do, including what to do. We understand that. But as you actually start to look at these type scenes all together, the Torah, I think, is giving us a strong message. That while the mask may work in a short term, it fails in the long term. And I think that's a powerful lesson for us to think about, how we deal with who we are, how we deal with other people. Do we look for the expedient way of having that conversation so that in the short term we get what we want, or we don't deal with the conflict, or we put it off? Or do we say, wait a second, that mask of the moment that's hiding the way that I'm truly feeling, the way that I'm truly dealing with it, ultimately in the long run, isn't going to do me any good, and maybe it's time to take it off.
I think that's really interesting because it connects you in the addictions community. They say you're only as sick as your secrets.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, you're only as sick as your secrets? Yeah. I think that is powerful. That is powerful. And we all, look, there's no doubt we all hide certain aspects of ourselves for all of the reasons that we listed before, for safety, for expediency, right? We're struggling with that now, I think, as a Jewish people, by the way, right? In a world that is filled with anti-Semitism, in a world that feels a lot less safe than it did a year ago, even a few months ago. What do? Do we put the mask on? Do we say we're just like everybody else? In the short term, that may actually help us. Does it help us in the long term? According to what we learned today, probably not. Probably not. Any other comments or questions about this? It's a very interesting section, going back and forth and showing a lot of human emotion, and both the high points and low points of sort of human reactions to things as everybody struggles with this. But I'm very impressed with seeing this, as Rabbi Sachs does, as part of these four archetypes or type scenes, and looking at it then on the whole, as opposed to just all by itself. Any other questions or comments? All right.